Greetings, fellow men. Servus Männer. It's Red Pill Germany again, and today I want to share my dangerous half knowledge with you again on the topic of superheroes and gods. Now, many of you, of course, have heard that, for example, Marvel Comics is replacing the mighty Thor superhero character with a female version, for example. So this has been discussed in the manosphere. Howard Dare, for example, is making a lot of videos about superheroes. And of course, superheroes are a very popular, widespread cultural meme or phenomenon. So it is an important issue, of course, that these characters are now replaced with SJW versions. So first of all, I want to give you guys my take on the whole superhero phenomenon, and then I want to discuss afterwards what this attack on male superhero actually means in the cultural war. So of course most of you guys know that superheroes have always been there in human societies, in human folklore, or in fairy tales, or these kind of hero stories. So it is a really old phenomenon, and in antiquity and in former times these used to be gods, demigods, or just heroes of men. Examples are Theseus from Greek mythology, who was slaying Medusa, for example, and also the nowadays better known Heracles, who performed the Heraclean feats. Now he was also known as Hercules in Latin, and it is also called the labors of Hercules. So he was basically killing a lot of monsters and cleaning a really big stable. And then all the Indo-German cultures have their heroes, of course. There is Beowulf as a Scandinavian hero, but also Sigurd, or Siegfried as we call him in Germany, comes to mind. The slayer of dragons who bathed in dragon's blood and became a man of steel, so that no blade or weapon could harm him. He also had cool gadgets like an invisibility cloak, for example, or the magic sword, Balmung. And then, for example, in Irish folklore, there is a hero called Cuchulainn, I think. I'm sorry, I have no idea how to pronounce Gaelic, but I think Cuchulainn or something. And so his chariot, for example, is pretty reminiscent of the Batmobile. So the list literally goes on, and I could enumerate these old heroes and demigods for hours and hours, but the point is just that every civilization had these characters, these heroes or gods, and what they were is actually an personification or a manifestation, an allegorical figure for collective male virtues. So of course, in these old cultures, men were important as protectors and providers and basically making the country safe. I mean, what does it mean that a man takes a club, goes out into the mountains and kills a monster? That means that people can start using the pastures as land for their sheep, for example, or that they can cut down trees and farm the land. So these male heroes, this courage, this strength was required in order to build civilization, in order to conquer nature. Nature is not something romantic. Nature was really dangerous. It is still dangerous, but we have forgotten this. We city dwellers, we have forgotten this these days. So back then, male strength and male virtue was really necessary for the development of civilizations. And they paid their respect to this male virtue by praying to these gods or by telling these stories. So in that sense, these old superheroes, these ancient superheroes, were a celebration of male virtues. Now nowadays, the Marvel comic superheroes that we have, and I admit, I'm not a comic book fan. I just picked up something here and there from movies and pop culture, but these superheroes today, they still fulfill the same purpose, like in the 20th century when little children were watching these cartoons or were reading the comic books. It gave them a positive image of male virtue, of strength, of courage, of loyalty. All these positive qualities that these superheroes had was presenting to these young men a positive image of male nature. something to aspire to. So in that sense, the superhero of the 20th century comic book was still, even though it was not religious, was still fulfilling the same function as the religious or folklore heroes of our forefathers. And now in the 21st century, we see that they are under attack. And you might call this the meta war or the cultural war. I think Howard Dare did a lot of videos on that, and I tend to agree with him. It is not enough for gynocentric society, for feminist SJWs and manginas to crush men in divorce court or family court, take them to the cleaners and utterly destroy them. They also want to take away our heroes. They want to take away the allegorical figures, the manifestation in mythology that celebrate male nature and the male spirit. So they want to spiritually crush us, if you will. And at this point, I want to share a little anecdote with you. Now, it goes back to the summer of 2001, so just at the very beginning of the 21st century. And this is when I graduated from high school. And the headmaster of our school was an old, weak mangina bookworm. So he was something that we call a philologe. That is basically a guy who can speak Greek and Latin and is into old books. So he knew all these old myths, I mean, he was something of an expert when it comes to old mythology and ancient Greek and Latin texts. And maybe he knew a lot about Mesopotamia and the riverland cultures as well. So in order to demonstrate how smart he is, he had to talk about the epic of Gilgamesh and Gilgamesh's comrade Enkidu, the natural man, So this is a really cool story. If you're into ancient mythology, read that stuff. It's really awesome. So basically, Enkidu was King Gilgamesh's friend, or he became his comrade and friend, and they had a lot of adventures together, basically. So the important point here is just that Enkidu is kind of a superhero kind of guy. Like, he slays also a lot of beasts and they have a lot of adventures, blah blah blah. So the point was that this guy at our graduation address, the speech he gave to our graduation, he said that these heroes are a relic of the past. In the new millennium, we will not need those heroes anymore. We will enter a new age now of another level of civilization, basically, where we don't need strength and truth and loyalty and virtues and male spirit anymore, because we already conquered nature. All our enemies are friends now, and there are no more beasts in the forests that we have to slay, so that we can farm the land, basically. So he gave a speech that was at least half as monotonous and boring as mine about this topic. And already back then, in the summer of 2001, I called bullshit on that. And I told all my friends after that speech, this old bookworm is full of shit. Because I'm telling you guys, there will come a time when we will need male virtues again, and when we need soldiers and heroes again. Right? Because what are these heroes, It is just the collective work and labor of men building society and civilization personified in one superhero idol. That is what it is. It is a celebration of the male spirit. And I told my friends back then, we will need that again. Times will not stay as great as they are right now. And that was the summer of 2001. In September of the same year, we all know what happened. The Twin Towers in New York came down. And 15 years later, where are we now? Yeah, there are bombs going off in German cities. Pregnant women are slashed with machetes in broad daylight. People on the local train are attacked with axes. Priests are beheaded in their own churches by angry Muslim mobs. So this is the 21st century in which we live. And now people are telling us we don't need heroes, we don't need male virtues, we don't need strength and truth and loyalty and camaraderie. So this old baby boomer mangina was completely wrong back then. And these SJWs are also wrong today. Back then people still believed in the end of history and that everything will be just one glorious ride from now on, because all the obstacles and all the wars, all the dangers and all the challenges are finally behind us and it will be like Star Trek now. Well, I say these heroes are not a relic of the past. If we don't want to become a relic of the past, we must become like Perseus, Theseus, Achilles, or Beowulf. Now, one little side note to the end. I mean, there is one superhero in the Marvel Universe who is actually one of the original gods in Northern mythology, and that is the mighty Thor, of course. And the thing is that Northern paganism is still practiced in Scandinavia, and it is actually growing again in numbers. So they are performing their ceremonies out in nature, and they believe in their old gods. And I know a professor, for example, from Denmark. He has a tattoo of the hammer of Thor, for example, and he is a pagan. He believes in the old religion of his forefathers. So it is quite funny, that you have a comic book version of one of their gods, and now Marvel is replacing that god with a woman. I mean, isn't that almost blasphemy? Shouldn't they be more respectful towards that religion? Shouldn't they? I mean, what if someone decided to make Muhammad a Marvel superhero and then replace him with a female version of Muhammad that would still be called Mighty Muhammad? I mean, even if you draw him, they just blow up embassies. I really would want to see what happens then. But, in the fact of the Scandinavian god Thor, I don't see people in Sweden and Denmark blowing up the American embassy because they basically are, first of all, drawing their god, and then second of all, changing his sex, So doesn't that just show how civilized and peaceful Northern pagans really are? Now, of course, all these superhero-like gods were just one aspect of these old religions. In these pantheons, they of course had female gods also, like fertility gods or gods of matrimony and gods of the home, right? So to sum up, I think the superhero phenomenon, if you want to call it like that, is a very old one. You could already see that in gods, demigods, and ancient heroes in religion and folklore in Indo-German cultures. My understanding is that these characters are manifestations or allegories of male virtues such as strength, courage, and loyalty. And by serving those gods and telling the stories of those heroes, people paid their respects to the collective labor and work of all men in their tribe who made civilization possible in the first place. Today, social justice warriors, feminists, and manginas are not only attacking men in real life, but they also attack us spiritually by removing the last secular remnants that fulfill the same function as the gods of old, namely comic book superheroes, who in the 20th century used to fulfill the same basic function as the heroes of old, being positive examples of male roles, of male virtues for our children and young men. Now all those hippie baby boomers thought, of course, that the age of war and of threat is over and we can finally ascend to new levels of civilization in the 21st century, in the new millennium. But they were of course all wrong. When I look at what is happening in my cities in Germany these days, I don't want to see a black woman in an Iron Man suit. I don't want to see Thor with boobs. Well, only bodybuilder boobs, of course, not female boobs, Non-lactating boobs for my Thor only, okay? So I wanna read the stories of old. And if I ever have children, I know that I will read to them the original stories, even though they're rated R. So we will see how all of this turns out when everyone sees in the news how our reality actually looks like. I think people wanna see real action heroes and not those fake Mangina SJW action heroes. So my piece of advice to video game companies, or for example to movie companies or production companies, is bring back real superheroes, and this is probably how you can make a profit. This is a story that people want to see. So, and I also just want to mention that I came across a really cool short animated movie, Sanjay's Super Team, and it is about a little Indian boy and the relationship to his father. So it touches upon the topics of culture and also gods and superheroes actually, but also a little boy's relationship with his father. So I really liked this movie. Check it out if you want. It's linked in the description below. Alright guys, thanks for listening. Have a great day. Servus, Kameraden.